G'day, I'm Matt here with Shane Smith from HBO's Vice, and congratulations, Shane, you broke into the category for Best Information or Special Series. What was it like to get that Emmy nomination this year?
Well, it was great. It's always great to get nominated. We're actually nominated for 3 Emmys this year, so Best Informational Series, Best Cinematography, which is great, and Best Sound. So we're really excited. We're a new show, and we've already been nominated for 4 Emmys, so that's great. We work hard on the show, so to have, the Academy recognize that is amazing. We're also, I think, the first sort of internet company to sort of go to TV, and in our first season we got nominated, and so for us it's sort of a vindication of what we do online as well, because we have HBO, which is sort of the gold standard of TV in America, and we have the Academy nominating us for Emmys, and we're an online company, so for us that's a vindication of what we do.
And what was that like, becoming a series from that sort of online presence? And how did that come to be that you became a HBO show?
Well, I think that we had talked to a few networks, and when we met HBO, they're pretty remarkable at what they do. I think they're the best network in the world right now, and they have some of the best programming for sure. And so, they let us do what we wanted to do, and they sort of gave us the freedom to do it, and they really pushed the show hard and really got behind it. And I don't think there's a network like HBO sort of anywhere else in the world. I mean, they take risks, and they back their artists, and they create this great content. So, it couldn't be a sort of nicer marriage. There's all kinds of horror stories in TV about the worst things happening, and content by consensus, and death by 1,000 cuts, and everybody's pissing on the project, and everyone's trying to get their work. And HBO just lets you do what you want to do, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think HBO, renowned for its drama series, renowned for its comedy series, renowned for documentary films, but this is sort of a slightly new avenue for them to do this documentary series. And this
we're the first. Yeah, we're the first news magazine show that HBO's ever done, and they weren't sure how it would go, and they were pleasantly surprised. It rated very well, and it got lots of social pickup and nominated for awards, and so HBO are happy, and we're happy, and everybody's happy.
And for the Emmys, you've submitted the 3 first episodes of season 2, I believe, to judges. Was it hard for you to guys to choose what you're sending in when they're all quite different, each of your episodes?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to do, because each one represents a different facet of what we do. So very, very difficult. Everybody sort of pitched in their 2 cents and sort of said, well, it's either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. So there were only a couple of them that didn't make the cut, so we had a real hard time. But I think that the first episode, with Afghanistan and the problems that Brazil were having leading up to the World Cup, shows a sort of, in the action, it also showed investigative reporting with Afghanistan money pit, and the billions and billions of dollars being wasted there. I think Greenland shows our commitment to environmental programming, as well as visually sort of stunning footage. As well as human slavery and the continuing problem that is. So I think it showed a big range. And now, granted, I would have loved to have gotten Sudan in there, or gotten modern day policing, or there's so many the Kazakh mutants. There were so many amazing shows I would have liked to put in, but hopefully those 3 will do well.
Yeah, and like I guess when you're approaching these big issues on the show, and it tackles some massive ones, like what hat do you sort of have on first? Is it a journalistic hat? Is it a storytelling hat? Is it a like what? From where do you take your lead when you're constructing these pieces?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's hard because, we're shooting season 3 now, but season 3 will go on the air in March. So, it has to be, the stories have to be sort of evergreen. What's going to still be relevant then. And we say it always has to have 3 components. It has to have a story with sort of a beginning, middle, and end. It has to be like a punch in the face, like bang, here's a story. B, it has to look good. I think part of the problem with a lot of news shows is they become talking heads. It's just people talking, and that's not so interesting. TV is a visual medium, so it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about climate change, how do we keep it from just talking to a bunch of scientists? And that's when, if you can see Greenland melting, it's so spectacular, and you can say, okay, well, it's melting and raising the sea level, but then we'll go talk to the scientists. So, I mean, we have to, there has to be a visual component to it. And then, there's a lot of things like, the news cycle is so small. It's, the Boston bombing was a huge story in America, but it was a huge story for a week. And we said, okay, well, how did these guys get radicalized? How did they end up wanting to bomb the Boston Marathon? So we went to Dagestan. So we actually, we go in before the news cycle, we go in after the news cycle, and try to do sort of a more comprehensive story around that particular, idea or whatever happened.
Yeah, and some of these issues that you do go in and sort of attack are quite loaded issues, from like climate change, which has a lot of different political interests involved, from sort of looking at the drones and the way drones are used in America and the way that drones are approached in the Middle East. Do you sort of embrace taking those sorts of controversial issues head on, and sort of like, it's very hard not to sort of navigate through the different political leanings people might have?
Yeah, I think, America has become quite polarized in its news, and you have the far right, who are essentially talk radio, and you have the left that just sort of points at the far right and makes fun of them, and it's become comedy. But nobody really goes and just tells the story. Nobody goes and says, well, here we are, and here's what's happening. I think that, it's also important that, because media in America is owned by basically 4 companies, and those 4 companies are all huge companies, you hear a lot about the liberal media, but if it's 4 multi-billion-dollar companies, it's not so liberal. And I think that we don't really get alternative perspectives. When you go to Afghanistan, when you go to Pakistan, drones mean something completely different than they mean in America. In America, they're like, oh, we just send a drone in, and it's surgical, and no Americans die, and it's great. But if you go to Afghanistan and Pakistan, these are the greatest recruiting tools for the Taliban and for other terrorist groups. So you see just more and more terrorists, and just not to be long-winded, but we went into Iraq because they said that Saddam Hussein was supporting Al-Qaeda, which was patently not true. Anyone with half a brain knew that the Ba'athist Party was a secular regime. They were the enemies of Al-Qaeda, but they made up some lies, and they went in. Now, because we botched it so badly, ISIS, who make Al-Qaeda look like a tea party, are taking over the country, right? So why isn't that the biggest story in American media? I don't know. If you look in Afghanistan, what we're reporting on it, if you look at Afghanistan and you say, okay, the whole reason why we went into Afghanistan was because Al-Qaeda was training a few pockets of terrorists. Not good, I agree. However, now, because of drone attacks, you have whole swaths of Afghanistan, not only Afghanistan, but Pakistan, that are hyper-radicalized. So now you have a situation that's 10 times, 100 times worse than when we went in. It's ridiculously stupid.
Yeah, no, and it's like But you hear on the other side, of issues like that, people go, "Oh well, the realities of war, these things happen." How do you sort of like? Have you had much negativity from some of the ways you've attacked these issues?
Not really. I mean, I think we get the interesting thing about America is that it's maybe one of the only countries in the world where climate change is still a debate. It's still a question. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's religious reasons. There's, obviously the fossil fuel, lobbies and the great amount of wealth and money that they put into sort of, causing question marks. So we'll notice that when we do most of our pieces, it's like a huge sort of groundswell of, tell the good story and fight the good fight, and oh my God, I didn't know that was happening. And when you do a climate piece, you'll notice that the first 10 comments will be incredibly negative and attacking and whatever. And what we found out was that we're actually doing a story on it now, is that they have Google alerts, and the minute anything comes up that sort of talks about climate change, they know that if the first 4 comments are negative, then that is perceived as negative. So what happens is they have paid bloggers who will go and they'll put on these negative posts, and then what happens is a war of your real audience sort of going after these comments, and then the sort of paid comments sort of fighting them, and you'll see just so much more social explosion around anything around climate change, and it's a microcosm of the war that's going on with propaganda. I mean, there's 93% consensus among the scientific community saying that climate change is here and it's man-made. There's never 93%. The only 93% consensus in the scientific community, besides climate change, is that we're all going to die. That's pretty much it. And so the fact that it's still a debate in America, the fact that it's there's so much vested interest in it, we do get a lot of comments on anything we do around the environment, but we're committed to keep telling the story.
So the environment has proved more controversial than the drones issue from people online.
Yeah, well, no, definitely our climate change content is by far our most controversial, which to me is crazy. I mean, it's the only story where nobody wins. I mean, obviously, fossil fuel companies win in the short term. But when you're talking about sea level rise at 28 feet, at 35 feet, you're talking about mass human migration. You're talking about a changing world. You're talking about 80 of our biggest cities underwater. The debate isn't that it's going to happen. The consensus is it is going to happen. It's just how long will it take, and will we have time to adapt? And so I think that there's a particularly sort of insidious part of big business that's saying they know it. I mean, the scientists know it. If you have half a brain, you know it. But they're saying they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into denying it for short-term profit, because maybe it doesn't affect you because you're old. You're 65 and you're running whatever oil company you're running, but it affects the rest of the world and every generation to come. So I think it's one of the biggest issues that we have a responsibility to report on.
Yeah, it's interesting how much people are prepared to pay on insurance to insure their house and things like that, when the chance of something happening to it is relatively low, yet when the chances of something happening to the planet is so high, the 93% of scientists, yet people aren't prepared to do much about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's a difficult issue, and look, we have to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% in the next decade, and that's going to be difficult to do, considering our carbon emissions are going up. So difficult problems, difficult solutions, and that said, if we don't solve these problems, it's the collective humanity that suffers.
What is it like getting on the ground in Greenland, looking at climate change, in Afghanistan, looking at how the war's going there? Like, as a journalist, what is it like getting there and seeing the people on the ground?
Well, I think Greenland is a tragedy. It's just melting as fast as it can, and if Antarctica starts melting, the Arctic, pack ice is melting, then you sort of see in real time what we're facing, and it's terrifying. This ice has been there 100,000 years, and it's just melting and melting. So that's just definitely one aspect. I mean, going to Afghanistan is, I mean, you know, it's sad in a word because when we were there shooting in Kandahar, it's quite obvious that America and the ANA control the bases and the Taliban control everything else. And, they're going to go right back to civil war if they're not in civil war now. I mean, I don't know what your definition of civil war is, but the Taliban are definitely growing in strength and numbers and in military successes against the coalition forces. So it's sad. And then when you look at, we've spent over $1 trillion in the conflict. We've thrown $100 billion down the toilet. There's corruption. In many cases, American money is going directly to the Taliban. It shows the tragedy that is war. And, every time governments go to war, they should understand what it means. And, having gone to so many war zones, I'll tell you one thing, I'm definitely anti-war because there's nothing good about war.
Yeah. Does it sometimes frustrate you seeing whether it's the liberal media or the conservative media or just the regular media, the issues they're covering in the news compared to what you guys are doing, and sort of that it's a shame that there's not more exposure to the issues that you're covering in Vice?
Well, it's sort of a double-edged sword because of the failure of a lot of sort of mainstream media outlets. Vice, which was a lifestyle magazine, that wouldn't have had a chance to play. I always say, if Vice is doing the news, that means the world is really fucked up. Because all we used to care was cocaine supermodels and rare denim. But as we expanded around the world, we saw all these problems, and we said, hey, somebody should be saying something about this. Where are all the adults? And then I realized, oh, I have one of the biggest youth platforms in the world. I have to say something about it. And so we started saying things about it and started doing stories on the environment or on, youth in rebellion or wars or whatever, the news was. And, if CNN or MSNBC or Fox had been doing their jobs, then there wouldn't be a place for Vice to do that. And so, that said, do I wish that climate change, had more, supporters in the media? Do I wish that people would talk about, Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria a little bit more honestly and not so polarized and not so polemic and paradigmic with politics? Yes, because I think it would be better for the world. And when you have two sides sort of preaching political rhetoric rather than just telling the news, then you exacerbate the problem rather than try to fix the problem.
And I guess it doesn't get into those nuances of the story and the underlying issues behind problems. It just sort of gets to the ultimate opinions that people have formed and just have them shouting them at each other.
Yeah, there's a lot of shouting going on, and we're trying not to shout at anybody. We're just trying to turn the camera on.
Yeah. Now we got a couple of questions in the chat room, and we've got a couple of good ones from, I believe it's Kent, and he asked, why do you think the issues you present are important, and what do you think are the best ways to get younger people engaged on the range of issues Vice talks about?
Well, why do I think they're important? I think climate change is the biggest issue facing humanity today, so I think it's it's going to affect the world, every single one of us. So no one can get away from it. So I think that it's important, and I think that everyone needs to be talking about it and trying to find solutions. And our job as media is to do that. I think that, again, war is bad, and people forget that. And so after 9/11, everybody's looking for revenge, and we've got to do something and stop this, and terrorism, it's bad. Yet we went into Iraq, and if you see what would happen in Iraq now, you have ISIS declaring the Islamic State there. You have your worst nightmare come true, and Afghanistan devolving into a failed state in civil war. I think we as a generation have to learn, okay, let's not be quick to go to war. Because if you look at the last two that have gone on for 10 plus years, they've been just disastrous. That's an important story. I think that if you look at, it's 2014 and we still have 35 to 50 million people living in slavery. We should have to fix that. I think for the baby boomers, the check was in the mail, and for Gen Y, the check's been delivered and they're waiting for payment. So these stories, A, have to happen, and then B, there has to be action taken about these stories. We have to get on with fixing all the messes, not creating any more messes. So that's our mission, is to do the first part of that and show the problems to as many people as we can. And then it's the people who've seen that, that we have to sort of collectively figure out, okay, politically or economically or what have you, we have to change those. And I think our mission is to tell Gen Y, who I think is the smartest generation ever because of their access to technology and information. I think it's up to Gen Y to fix the problems of the previous generations, and the first step in that is information.
Mm. Now, with the Emmy race that you guys are competing in, nominated alongside you as a producer is Bill Maher. And that has me a little worried, because do you know what record Bill Maher holds at the Emmys?
No.
I don't think anyone has been nominated for more Emmys and not won one. He's on about 30 Emmy nominations without a win. So it could be the kiss of death to your Emmy campaign.
It means it's about time to win one.
Yeah.
It means he's due.
Yeah, it does. And how exciting would it be if the thing that finally broke his losing streak was Vice?
Well, no one would be happier than me to give him an Emmy and say, there you go, boss.
Mm. How has Bill Maher been supportive of the show? Like, obviously he has, but like, what's it been like with him being involved?
I mean, look, he's a very intelligent guy. He understands not only news, but how news affects America and politicians and the power that news has in America to push politicians. Probably better than anybody out there. It's definitely an incredibly frustrating job. To be a sane person in political commentary, which is an insane world. But he does a fantastic job. He's got an incredible audience, that's loyal to him, and he definitely sort of took the freshman kids and taught them the ropes at HBO, and he's not afraid to take chances, and we need more people like that in the world.
To wrap up our chat, Shane, what of all the issues you've tackled has been the thing that surprised you most, and you've sort of been the most sort of like, I'm so glad we got around to tackling this issue on Vice?
Well, again, I'm surprised about the controversy. I didn't think there'd be so much controversy around climate change, but that's been a fight that we're willing to do. I think something that we wouldn't have done traditionally that really sort of struck a chord with me was the poaching and the rhino, the extinction of the rhino because of a powdered rhino horn in Vietnam and China. And when they pitched me the story, I wasn't so into it. But then when you can see clearly how if you commodify an animal or product that comes from an animal, or illegal, trade in animals, how quickly we will decimate that species, and how incredibly sort of cancerous humans are. We just destroy, like we have King Midas's touch. We'll make a lot of money, but we'll kill whatever we touch. And it was a really sobering idea that brought us to a story that we're doing now, which is, all of these animals and biospheres and in ecological sort of areas are what are curing our diseases now, because of the diseases, like superstaph and stuff, we're living in kind of a post-antibiotic world, which we're seeing with the Ebola outbreak. Our antibiotics will not combat a lot of the illnesses, because the illnesses are getting smarter. So what we have to do is go back to pre-antibiotic things of finding cancer-solving or preventative drugs on sloth mold, and they're going down into the caves to find 100,000-year-old flowers that can sort of have antibodies against diseases. And so if you look at that, you say, oh, all of the cures to our illnesses are in these sort of ecological preserves. And what are we doing? We're destroying them as fast as we can. And so, again, I didn't really know that much about that story, but now I find it fascinating.
Mm. Well, thank you so much, Shane, for chatting to us. It's so exciting for me to talk to someone who does journalism that covers things other than Emmy submissions, comedy actor, and things like that. As much as I love that, so thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Okay, indeed.